Welcome to the Kingfisher podcast mini-series. Today we're talking all about semiotics and why it's so important to know. We'll be interviewing our head of semiotics, the expert in semiotics, Dr. Nick Goddard, and I will be asking him some provocative questions on behalf of our listeners. Now, we do this type of thing at Kingfisher because we're an insights and strategy consultancy. We're made up of folks who are passionately curious about the world we live in, and we want to share our learning with you in a way we hope that inspires positive change, not just for consumers, people, but brands and organizations too. So it's with a warm welcome that we introduce our head of semiotics, Dr. Nick Goddard. Nick, why don't you introduce yourself?
Of course. I'm Dr. Nick Goddard, head of semiotics at Kingfisher, and it's my role to help brands take control of what they stand for and flourish, of course. I'm also an occasional lecturer in anthropology at UCL as well.
Fantastic, University College London there. So today we're going to talk together about the value of semiotics, why it's important, what it is, and why it's essential for brands, organisation and culture, especially now. So let's begin, let's crack straight on. Nick, what is semiotics?
Okay, so in a sentence, trying to be as succinct as possible here, at its heart, semiotics is the only systematic way to transform brands by taking control of their cultural meaning to give them the competitive edge.
Okay, so Nick, why now? Why now to think about this?
Well, semiotics, an important aspect of semiotics is keeping up with change. Strong brands are culturally relevant. They're in the moment, they're of now, it's very contemporary. And semiotics is really important because it's a method that enables brands to keep up with change. And this can be more important right now, with everything we've been through over the past 12 months. The world is going through some seriously significant changes and challenges. And a lot of these changes will stick. So the world has changed an awful lot in the last 12 months, and it will probably evolve hugely in the next however many months. And so semiotics is really important for managing these changes and taking advantage of them.
Managing changes and taking advantage of them, understanding what's emergent and what's going to be the new dominant changes. I understand. Why would a brand owner need semiotics?
Well, as I said, the world is always changing. Even when there isn't a pandemic, the world is always changing. Consumers' values, their beliefs and their behaviors, what your competitors are doing, how the category is changing, what challenges are emerging in the category. Things are always shifting. Culture moves inexorably forward. So brands need to stay ahead. They need to evolve and they need to transform. The question is, what does this mean for your brand? Which direction do you go? How should you position your brand? What should your new message be? And what should you change? So there are two reasons really. So one of them is keeping up with the consumer. That is keeping up with consumer expectations and perceptions of your brand. There's often a gap between what a brand stands for, what it means, and consumers' perceptions and responses to the brand. Now, semiotics accesses the underlying meanings that consumers perceive based on the cultural signs a brand uses, what's going on in the category and competitor context, as well as the broader and wider cultural context. So it really provides crucial insight for brand owners to adapt their messaging and better control that meaning to make it more relevant and more powerful. Now, so it's a really powerful tool to develop brand associations and add brand values that make all the difference in the market. Now, the second is actually leading the consumer. This is an opportunity for your brand to be a leader in a category, to really evolve your brand around the trends that are just emerging into the mainstream. The things that consumers will get really excited by and are really attuned to, the factors that will make your brand stand out and have some really supercharged meaning for consumers.
So what do you get as an output from semiotics? Like, what are the key benefits, would you say?
So, in short, three things. Number one, you get completely original, game-changing insights. Semiotics looks at the issues facing your brand differently. The findings and recommendations it delivers are the kind of thing you won't see from any of the research methods. Semiotics is very much, I think, a thinking outside the box approach to research. And I've often heard our clients say things like, we just couldn't have got here without semiotics. It provides such a unique perspective, problem solving in terms of insights as well. Number two, really importantly, and as we kind of touched on, it's a future-facing approach. research is traditionally very good at telling you what's going on in the now, which is great, but semiotics delivers paths forward for your brand. You can always be confident that you'll come away from semiotics with a clear direction for the future of your brand. And 3, it provides structured creativity. It allows creatives and agencies to do really creative things within really clear parameters. So it channels and enhances creativity and gives support to the right kinds of bold ideas. And it can do this because it provides recommendations that are very clear, but also very flexible enough to allow creativity to flourish.
I see. So let's break it down a little bit for our listeners. What would you say, how would you define a semiotic insight?
So one way of explaining this is through the concepts of what, why, and how. Now, while many of the research methods focus on what questions, semiotics excels at delivering on 2 things. It answers the why questions and it answers the how questions as well. Now, answers to what questions tell you what's going on at the moment, what consumer behaviors, attitudes, perceptions are now, which is obviously very useful. Now, why questions, on the other hand, identify the underlying causes of an issue. For example, why have consumer perceptions of my brand changed? Why is my brand losing market share? And these are the things consumers really struggle to account for when we talk to them, because they're usually outside of their conscious understanding. Now, once you understand the why questions, it's easier to answer the how questions. How questions identify solutions to your brand, e.g. how to change perceptions of your brand, how to grow market share. It's about optimization and growth. And semiotic insights reveal the underlying causes and powerful, effective solutions, which means they're also inherently strategic. The great bonus of semiotics. With semiotics, you're always looking for opportunities for a brand to grow and become more relevant for consumers.
Relevant for consumers, I think, is the key here. So how is it different from other research methods?
It's a good question. So to begin with, semiotics looks at different data to most research. It's actual stuff it looks at is different to most of the types of research. You know, consumers are able to tell us only so much in terms of their behaviors and attitudes, but semiotics looks at things that consumers really struggle to articulate. Semiotics is looking at data produced by the wider culture, which includes brands, categories, media, trends, changing beliefs and values and behaviors. And this is very important data because consumers' attitudes and behaviors are shaped by culture. You know, it's now widely recognized within the scientific community that humans are cultural animals. Our DNA is shaped by culture, and culture underpins our decision making, our experiences, and our feelings, our emotions. You know, culture is therefore the lifeblood of brands, really. So in order to explain this a bit more, I'm going to refer to what we see here, the semiotic sandwich. So first, research insights usually come from the middle of the sandwich by going to the consumer, again, which is great, but consumers only know so much about themselves. And to be fair to them, they know even less about brands, categories, and competitors, and so forth. They're not really interested in that. They're more interested in what they need in the moment. But with semiotics, the insights come from analysing the 2 other levels of culture, above and below the consumer. Now, why is this important? Well, as you said earlier, because culture shapes consumers and their day-to-day experiences and behaviours. So in the top slice of the sandwich is the top-down cultural stuff, the big ideas, concepts, beliefs about the way things work, the big narratives and stories, and the kind of codes that are shaping cultural discourse and conversation. Then we go down to the bottom slice of the sandwich, and this is the more granular bottom-up stuff. It's imagery, language, colours, products and stories and so forth. It's about how the top-down ideas are actually communicated. So these represent the 2 sides of what semiotics does and what it delivers. Let's go into a little bit more detail on them. So let's start with the bottom-up culture side, as this is what people tend to think of as semiotics. It's about the signs and symbols brands use to convey their meanings and the values they stand for in their comms, on packaging, through their messaging, on social, etc. So it's more executional. Then we have the top-down culture side. This is the semiotic secret weapon, where brands get a real, genuine edge here. It's much more strategic and higher level for brands. This is about what your brand should stand for and how it can challenge competitors. Ultimately, how it can tap into cultural trends that will most strongly appeal to their target consumers. And often on a project, we'll use both of these sides of semiotics, so it's also excellent value for money. So should we have a look at an example?
Yeah, let's do that. Do you have any examples that you can show us where you have perhaps evolved a brand?
Sure, yeah, let's take a very simple example of this. This is from some work that I've done for Boots, part of a bigger project about evolving the brand, sort of making it into a sort of brand leader. Now, one of the recommendations you can see in action, you go out and go to Boots store, go to their website, and so forth, are the changes made to the Boots logo a couple of years ago. Now, they did two things here. They dropped the lozenge and they added since 1849. And these were direct recommendations from the Semiotics. Now, these are bottom-up recommendations, but they were based on top-down strategic insights that were about the bigger direction Boots needed to take as a brand to move forward. So the main insight here was that Boots was a brand with a long heritage. Now, heritage is a bit of a Janus-based concept. It can be expressed in different ways. It can be seen as a sort of out of date, or it can be seen as having longevity and staying power, and therefore have contemporary relevance. Now, unfortunately, at the time of the research, Boots was much more in the former dated territory. So the strategic bit here was about understanding how you could flex heritage to get that staying power. Now, staying power is about being classic, because classic conveys timelessness and enduring qualities. It's also about being confident about wearing your longevity with pride. So the kind of brands that are in this category, as you can see here, don't feel dated, nor do they feel too on trend. They feel literally timeless, as though they could sort of fit into any era. So the examples here demonstrate this. It's brands like Coke and Cadbury's and Disney, BBC, as well as sort of your standard timeless classic luxury brands like Chanel and Rolex. So first of all, what was going on with the Boots logo was that the lozenge was looked very dated. It had a distinctly 1960s feel, that they sort of literally encapsulated the brand and surrounded the brand. It was interesting, the actual logo typeface by itself had a strong classic feel. And by freeing it from the lozenge, by sort of letting it out the lozenge, this meaning of timeless, relevant, classic was activated. And finally, sort of the icing on the cake, or the cherry on the cake, as it were, was finally adding the since 1849 suffix. It really demonstrated confidence in Boots' heritage, turning it into a virtue and away from being an obstacle. So when we're doing semiotics, we're always looking at what's going on with other brands in other categories or related categories. And a key reference point here was Kiehl's, a brand that sort of flexes its own heritage values in a really contemporary direction. And it does this using lots of bottom-up semiotic cues. It sort of combines these fabulous 19th century apothecary elements and really bold modern design elements to sort of create this classic timeless feel. So we borrowed lots of those concepts to sort of push Boots forward.
Fantastic. Thank you. What a wonderful example. So here's a question. Let's flip it on its head rather than looking at outputs and the results of semiotics. What does a semiotic brief look like, Nick? What are the types of brand challenges that come across your desk, and what brand challenges can semiotics really answer?
So first I want to say that semiotics is an extremely flexible method. It's relevant to any project where you want to understand underlying why questions or the moving forward how questions. And importantly, it can very easily be used alongside other methods, which is what we do for lots of projects. But if you want to focus on where semiotics is most essential, it would be briefs about what your brand should stand for, whether that's evolving the brand, repositioning, or messaging, or even building a brand from scratch. And also for projects where you may have a positioning, where you want to know how to bring it to life most effectively. What should a brand say? What should it look like? What language should you use? It's also essential for briefs where you want to know where the current of culture is heading and how to harness these wins for your brand. What are the stories you should be telling? What emerging brands and categories should you be looking into to grow? And then there are briefs that are more about executional elements, such as developing comms, packaging, brand visual identity, and sort of nuances around language and expression.
I see. So in essence, how does semiotics add value for brands? I'm often asked that by clients. So how does it add value for brands?
Well, at a fairly fundamental level, if you're not doing semiotics, you're missing out on two enormous levels of data and all the insights they bring that you won't get from other approaches. So semiotics is as brand-centric and category-centric as it is consumer-centric. You'll see how our category works, its conventions, the main codes and trends that are being used, what competitors are getting right and wrong, and where your brand is located in this sort of competitive landscape. But ultimately, you'll understand how your brand can grow, whether it's changing what it stands for, whether it's innovating or leading in a category.
Can we prove it? Can we perhaps bring to life some case studies maybe?
Sure, let's have a look at a couple of case studies I've got here. So one of them is Lily's Kitchen. Now, for those not in the know, maybe you don't own a dog or a cat, Lily's Kitchen is a premium brand of dog and cat food. It's very much a challenger brand in the pet food category. Now, at the time of the research, they were doing really, really well, but they really wanted to grow the brand and define what it stood for, to inform everything from marketing to comms, to packaging and innovation. They wanted a sort of entire brand review of what it is they were actually doing and were going to mean to consumers. Now, kind of initially, they saw the brand as a kind of pet food version of Ben and Jerry's, the kind of the ethical David versus the lower quality Goliaths. And this was supported, at a very rational level by the really high quality ingredients in the product. And at this stage, the quite unique brand visual identity reflected the sort of from humble origins brand story they wanted. But using semiotics, we identified a much stronger way to position and communicate the brand through the concept of the born from love brand story. And this really transformed the brand from a rational choice to an emotional choice, because the brand story mirrored the powerful emotional connection owners have with their own pets. So buying Lily's Kitchen for your dog or cat was actually an expression of pure love. And you really can't put a price on pure love. So the brand moved to position itself around the irrational love people have for their pets.
Wonderful. And perhaps, is there an example that you can bring to life which talks about perhaps the dynamics of the audience? Perhaps maybe a charity example?
Yes, of course, yeah. So the example I'm going to talk about is Save the Children. Now, for Save the Children, the issue they had was around representing children caught up in conflict. A really serious issue, very sad stories and sort of all sorts of horrible things going on. So within this space in the charity world, the default was to show children as passive victims. And while this obviously generated a great deal of sympathy amongst audiences, what it didn't translate into was a more effective, more active engagement with the issue amongst supporters. Now, while there was an internal understanding that children needed to be shown with more agency, and prior research had also verified this, it wasn't clear to Save the Children how to do this and how to turn this into campaign territory. So the semiotics here was a really wide-ranging study. It looked at contemporary representations of war and conflict in the media and in popular culture. And this included both the BBC news, but also things like Avengers Infinity War, sort of real pop culture representations of war, the kind of thing that more people are probably exposed to than the news. But some of the more important takeouts of the campaign were that to show children as active agents, they had to be narrators of their own story, not directed by a third party. This wasn't about the charity speaking on behalf of the children. This is children speaking on their own behalf. And the other point was it also had to show that the support these children received would ultimately give them control to shape their own futures. It actually genuinely empowered them. And this came through really strongly in their See the Truth campaign, which is an image here from the advertising campaign that ran with this, which was really, really powerful and put children in a completely unique position within the children in conflict story.
Wonderful. So let's reflect on some other case studies that we have. And I'd like to put onto screen an image here which demonstrates the brand world of the charity Guide Dogs, which is a UK charity for people who have visual impairments and who require a guide dog. And what's really fascinating here is you can see, if we go for a before and after semiotics shot, you'll be able to see that indeed before, the dynamics portrayed about those people who they help, those people who have visual impairments, the dynamic and suggestion of this audience was very passive, removed, ostracized from society. And it wasn't their intent at all, but that was what they were perhaps mistakenly projecting. Whereas after semiotics looked at their brand world and all the different touch points involved in tonality and executional details, as Dr. Nick says, the bottom-up executional elements on that semiotic sandwich. We then informed direct strategy, which was around repositioning the brand and how they should go and talk about their offering, their proposition, and what that meant in terms of how they positioned their audience, their target audience, not just those people who donate to the charity, but also the people that they help. So you can see in this second slide, the visuals completely change, the way in which the dog is no longer so much the prominent hero, and actually it's all about empowering the lives of those with visual impairments, telling their stories, very similar, akin to your work previously, Nick, for Save the Children. So a really nice sort of complementary case study there. So Nick, what would you say are the key claims? What's the power of semiotics?
Okay, so in 3 punchy end lines. Number 1, it's a method that puts the tools of brand transformation into a brand owner's hands. So it provides a brand owner with an unprecedented level of control over what their brand stands for in a way that no other method can. Number 2, it guarantees your brand's cultural relevance. Now, culture is probably the single biggest factor shaping your brand's appeal and relevance. And semiotics is literally the only method that understands how culture works. Finally, number 3, it will give your brand the edge over competitors because you'll get totally unique insights you won't get from any other research method. So with semiotics, you can be one step ahead of other brands because you're looking at the cultural trends that are changing a category and driving consumer desire.
3 really insightful takeouts there. Thank you so much, Dr. Nick, for joining us today. Your enthusiasm, energy, and insights are always powerful and useful. We look forward to hearing questions from our audience. Do feel free to tweet us. It's at Kingfisher Co. Or indeed, you can inquire about semiotics a little bit more in depth. We're happy to take a call. Dr. Nick and I are always keen to talk about semiotics indeed. So the email address is inquiries@kingfisherconsultancy.co.uk. Well, that's all we have time for today, but do check out our other podcasts in the mini-series. So it's a goodbye from Nick.
Goodbye.
And a goodbye from me. Thank you so much, and see you again soon.